Welcome to my first new series in a long while, which I'm titling Review Journey. See, as a small creator who may or may not have taken a year-long hiatus from YouTube, I didn't have access to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 before launch, which means that I've been going reviewing this game at the same time everyone else started playing it. That then means that my review isn't really relevant to the people that were chomping at the bit to pick up this game on day one. So I've decided to tailor it to the sort of people that would be more on the fence about picking up a big title like this. A lot of people lead busy lives, me included, meaning that gaming isn't exactly on the forefront of their priorities. Unfortunately, that often makes many feel like a gargantuan 100-hour RPG just isn't possible for them to pick up, as it's too long and they don't have enough time to play it. That's where this series comes in. Part of the reason that many people feel like they aren't able to pick up a huge game like this is because they just don't feel like they have time to finish it, therefore it won't be worth their money. 60 quid is a lot to lay down, and I totally recognise that. And as one of those people who also works a full-time job, among other commitments anyway, I feel like I have something to offer in terms of helping people find out whether a big game will be a good idea for them to buy. Whether that's if it's consistently engaging, or if it's immersive enough to pick up and put down after getting home from work. That's why this series is a journey, to really study whether this is the case or not. What I'll be doing is reviewing the game every week and seeing how my thoughts change as I go along. This is part 1 of that series, so if you think that you're the type of person to be interested in either long-term reviews of games or the type of person that I spoke about in the opening of this video, consider subscribing. Oh, and every one of these videos will be up on Spotify for those of you that prefer to listen to this sort of content but don't have YouTube Premium. Just either go to the description below or search for Games Per Second the Review Journey and you'll find it pretty easily. Now, without further ado, I present to you part 1 of my review journey, my first 10 hours with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2.
I didn't give a fuck where you play.
Not the worst answer yourself.
You flatterer. Better keep your mind on
Come on. Oh, you blasted!
The first thing that struck me when I loaded into the medieval world of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was how stunningly beautiful it was. As a fan of another game running on Crytek's CryEngine, Hunt Showdown, I knew somewhat what I was getting into. Dense, detailed vegetation, murky but vibrant colours, and borderline photorealistic natural details, but the way that Warhorse Studios have harnessed Crytek's engine and delivered the best instance of a medieval world I've seen so far is just mind-blowing. It never stops being mind-blowing either, as each individual section of 15th century Bohemia stands out. Each small hamlet and big village has a unique presentation and feel. I feel it's more of the feel of each town that really makes a difference, from the muddy town of Troskovitz where you begin your journey after the prologue, to the walled village of Semin. I have so much more to see as I progress through my journey, but what I've seen so far, I love. I just want to add that for context, I didn't play the first game. I also haven't played a hardcore RPG like this one before. What I did do was watch all the cutscenes from the first game before I began this one, but I'd say that for those of you that just don't have time to do this, a simple summary would be sufficient just to get a picture of the events in the prequel. Moving back to the feel of this game, and I actually don't have a more intelligent or reviewy way to say this, but the vibe of the game is exactly what I want it to be for an RPG set in medieval times. That's how the game really grabs you. And that brings us on perfectly to the immersion side of the experience, which is in my opinion what will convince most people to lay down their hard-earned money to give Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 a go. Real immersion in open world games is hard to come by. If I ask you to think of a developer that's known for open world games, you'd probably say Ubisoft. Or maybe the more experienced gamers would mention the likes of a Bethesda or an Obsidian, or maybe a CD Projekt Red if they've played Cyberpunk or The Witcher. But I think for the majority of players, their most well-known open world game developer is Ubisoft. I actually think that if we look at immersion, Ubisoft is pretty weak when we see the efforts of many of the other studios that I just mentioned. In my opinion, that's due to their heavily system-based game mechanics that focus wholly on getting you to the next bit of the story as fast as possible, or forcing you to engage with their gameplay mechanics by adding a nice bit of required grind. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is so immersive because it does none of this. At no point are you required to do anything unless you're in the middle of a quest. In fact, I'm 10 hours in, and I've barely progressed to something that I could probably have done in about 3 hours at a push maybe. I keep getting lost in the game, dragged on smaller side quests, and just exploring the incredible world the developers have created. I don't think that I've ever played a game that sucks you in like this and feels so natural to explore. It's so brilliantly done that I'm going to devote the next paragraph entirely to what makes this game so immersive. And that's because nothing defines this game more and sets it apart so much. And that's a good thing, I promise you. The gameplay systems that define Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 are nothing short of genius. I've played a lot of games in my time, but nothing sticks out as having such complete mastery over creating a believable world as this. In many RPGs, you feel sort of like the world revolves around you, like nothing ever really happens unless you're there to witness it. But in this game, it's the polar opposite. I don't think I've ever struggled to find my footing in a world before I did at the start of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. But I mean that in the most positive sense possible. The medieval times were hostile and brutal, which is exactly how Bohemia feels when you enter it. People are suspicious of you at first glance. Your actions are remembered and noted for later, and your crimes were investigated and later on punished. Let me read you a few notes of things that happened during my first 10 hours. I needed to sleep but didn't have a bed, so I found a man living in a hut on his own about 5 minutes from town. I decided to knock him unconscious and rob him, but then after thinking about it and remembering that your actions have consequences, I decided that it would actually be safer to kill him and hide his body. I then slept in his bed and went on my way. 4 in-game hours later, I was confronted by a guard, who searched me on my way into a town and found the items that I stole, arrested me for theft, and told me that my crime had been reported by someone who had found the body. Insane. That was a review note that I made after my 4th gameplay session. Can I just say, how many other games are your crimes actively investigated and punished in? In so many games, it just feels like your actions roll off the world and life goes on. Whereas here, you're put in the stocks and left there for days if you commit an offence. Of course, I'm only 10 hours in, so I'm yet to uncover how much more this can affect your playthrough. But I love having a system that actually punishes you for wrongdoing. It makes me consider whether committing a crime is actually worth it, and it adds a nice bit of tension when I do decide to commit a crime. And I'll read you another one of my review notes to show you how committing a crime changes your relationship to game characters. At the start of the game, I was nursed by a nice lady who let me sleep in her home as I recovered. Later on, after being arrested several times, I returned to her house en route to another destination, only for her to treat me very differently. The lady was hostile and clearly didn't want me around. I decided to break into her cottage anyway, as I really needed to sleep, and she caught me and decided to run for the guards. I already had a poor reputation in the nearest town, so I had to kill the lady to avoid getting in trouble. I just want to add, by the way, that when I wrote this note, I was very new to the game and only had 1 or 2 hours clocked. I now know that it's a terrible idea to break into people's cottages in clear view of the owner of that cottage. But we move. It just shows your actions have consequences in this game, and it's so refreshing. So now I've described how the game world feels and what happens when you break the rules. But what are you actually doing when you play the game? What's the gameplay like? Well, the answer to that question is that so far, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 features the most manual gameplay I've ever experienced, with every element coming at a cost. It's tough but fair, and after 10 hours, I absolutely love it. First, let's talk combat. There has been much said about the combat in the first game, that it was slow, cumbersome, and ill-suited to fighting multiple enemies at once. As someone who didn't play the first game, I can't exactly comment on how this game's combat model differs from the original, but what I can say is that there's certainly a lot of depth that I haven't explored yet. I haven't shot a single arrow or crossbow bolt outside of the prologue, and I've only used a sword and club. What I can say though, is that combat is most definitely heavy and slow, and it rewards a methodical approach while punishing you for charging and swinging. That works for me, as someone who spent a lot of the last 2 years playing Chivalry 2, but it may surprise those of you that haven't experienced this type of combat. I actually think that combat comes across well in the first 10 hours of the game, but I'll leave it at that and say that I'll return to combat in the next review. I've actually spent more time preparing for combat than I've spent in actual combat, as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 rewards preparation above all else. But what does preparation actually mean in this context? Well, it mostly means making sure you're equipped with the right gear. That means not only armour like many other games, but the correct underclothes to that armour, and ensuring that your weapons are adequately sharpened and repaired, and yes, you'll have to do that manually. There's a lot to think about, and it can definitely be overwhelming in the first few hours of play, but I can already feel myself getting used to the layers upon layers of gameplay systems that are introduced to you in the opening sequences. That's definitely one thing that you'll have to get used to in the introduction, by the way. There's a hell of a lot to learn in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and that may put off some of you, but I'd highly recommend sticking with it and seeing where it takes you. There are other things to think about when checking together an outfit as well. Your clothes aren't just there to protect you, they're also there to play to your other strengths as well. At the beginning of the game, you'll be asked to choose between one of 3 classes, one being your classic hot-headed soldier type, another being the smooth-talking negotiator, and finally the stealthy scout. I picked the negotiator, as I usually go for the class that prioritises violence, so I thought it would be interesting to pick the class that's most useful in a verbal joust, in a game involving so much dialogue. That's where your outfits come into play. Your ability to lie and convince people of things comes partially from your charisma stat, which is boosted or lowered depending on the look you've created for yourself. If you're covered in mud or blood, and yes, I've seen the memes, the Homelander memes, and if you've tailored your Twitter feed towards this game, you'll probably have seen what I mean. But if you are covered in mud or blood, you won't be convincing anyone of anything. You'll be treated poorly and suspiciously by other people. If you're well dressed, tidy, and properly clean, then you'll be far more likely to succeed in convincing the local bailiff that you didn't commit the crime you so obviously committed in broad daylight. I personally love that level of gameplay immersion, and it really stands out to me in a game that was already doing a fantastic job of sticking out for its worlds. So combine that with a manual gameplay style that forces you to sharpen your sword by hand, smith your own weapons, and dress for every situation differently, and I'm seriously impressed. Going into the conclusion of this first review, and I realise fully by the way that I'm giving first impressions of a game I've played for only a handful of hours, but I can't say anything but how genuinely happy I am that I picked up Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It's the first time in a very long while that a single player game has animated me as much as it does in the opening hours, and it makes me monumentally excited to continue to play and explore the game as I progress to new lands and new areas. I love how I can actually feel my progression here as well, as people begin to respect you, more and more due to what you wear and the combat systems begin to click. I love how I've begun to discover how this world works and how its individual systems layer on top of each other to really give you that sense of immersion that no other game I've ever played has provided to this degree. Obviously, I can't say at this point whether the game is for you or not, or whether it's going to be worth your time past the opening hours, but I will get to that. What I can say though, is that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is exactly what I hoped it would be so far when I laid 60 quid down in the PS Store. Oh, and I feel like I should probably include a short note on performance. This will only be brief, as I'll go more into detail next week after I've played more, but so far, the game appears to run very smoothly on PS5, with minimal stutter and frame drops. There are some visual glitches, and I've gotten stuck on terrain every now and then, but I've not yet had to restart or had any crashes to fix these issues, which is very good because the save system in this game can be absolutely brutal. So far so good on performance then, but check back in next week for that one. So, to conclude the first part of my review journey of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I'm very impressed, and I can't wait to experience more. What a strong start, I'm genuinely so excited to keep playing. Right, that's it for this part, so let me just include the usual bits and bobs. If you enjoyed, then consider subscribing. There's a lot more content incoming as I make my way back to YouTube. The series is all available on Spotify in podcast form, and you can find that and all my other links in the description below. Have a great week, and goodbye for now. I'll see you for part 2 very soon.